Kia ora everyone. Hey, welcome back, and for our video today I'd just like to encourage, if you've got some spare time, which you all do, reading any books by James K.A. Smith is always a good move. This is a great book. I'm looking at Charles Taylor. Charles Taylor is a Canadian philosopher who was looking at the secular age. Okay, so he was looking at effectively going, why was it that 400 years ago you were considered crazy if you didn't believe in God, and now 400 years later in our present day you seem crazy if you do believe in God? It's an incredible book, but one of the things he talks about is in the Western world, we've got this incredible ability called fragmentalization. Big word, but effectively what it means is in part, we can, and we do, and without even willingly, we love to break life down into fragments. If you remember at high school, if you got to dissect a frog, for example, what we do in the West is we like to look at all the little parts that make up the frog, right? Think about going to university, the Western academic way of life. It's about breaking things up into different streams, fragmenting knowledge into different streams. You think about physics and science, we kind of learn about solutions, then go down to molecules, to atoms, to components of atoms, and then into the quantum level of what's going on. We'd love to break things down deeper and deeper and can fragment them. When it comes to faith, we can do this as well. The Christian faith, we can get into fragmented systematic theology where we can talk about things like justification or righteousness or transubstantiation, all these big and significant words, but we'll think about them in fragments. And this can also result in fragmented lives where there's different parts of our lives that all look very different from each other. One of the things I don't think we are so good at in the West, though, is connecting things. We're good at fragmenting, we're not good at connecting. When you read through the Gospels, you see Jesus as someone who's always connecting things. He's pointing things out and saying, hey, when this was talked about in the Old Testament, it's connected to this. This is all working together. He's pointing out connections, and the road to Emmaus is a highlight of this, which you can read about at the end of the Gospel of Luke. Where Jesus walking along, he explains all things in the scriptures, how all of these things had to happen to him, right? And if you remember, these two disciples' responses was, were not our hearts burning within us as we walked along the road with him, as Jesus was connecting these different things? You can even think about the way we do church, right? On a Sunday morning, for example, we kind of fragment it up. We've got worship, which is different to sermon, which is different to prayer, which is different to fellowship. There's all these different parts. We like different parts. There's nothing necessarily wrong with this, but what this fragmentation in our society can lead to is deeply fragmented lives. It can lead to a faith which is primarily, for example, we relegate it to the area of feeling. It can lead to a faith which is privatized, so it's about me and my faith and who are you to talk into this. It can lead to a life as well, and I see this so often in others and even my own life, a life that's pulled in so many different fragmented directions, with our calling primarily coming from this cohesive cultural story we live in, rather than the fragments of faith around it. And perhaps you're feeling this in lockdown. Perhaps you're feeling this little nagging voice that's telling you the secular story maybe isn't all it's cracked up to be. That perhaps getting the batch and the BMW and the boat, they're great but a little empty. But if our story of faith is fragmented into lots of little parts, that's not going to be compelling enough to call us, is it? But listen to what Paul says in Philippians. We're going to be reading along here. Philippians 1, verse 9 to 11. He says, "This is my prayer, that your love may abound more and more in knowledge and depth of insight, so that you may be able to discern what is best, and you may be pure and blameless until the day of Christ, filled with the fruit of righteousness that comes through Jesus Christ, to the glory and praise of God." And what we get here in verse 9 is Paul lets us into the prayer that he's praying for his mates, right? For his fellowship, his brothers and sisters back in Philippi. He's praying this from lockdown. And the first thing he's praying, you'll see this, he says that your love may abound more and more. Now, it may be no surprise if you've grown up in the church, this word for love, agape, it's the self-giving love of God. Right? This deep sacrificial love that's focused on the one who is being loved, the beloved, not on the lover. And so when Paul's praying for this love, what does he want the church in Philippi to do? He wants their love to abound. Literally in the Greek it says still more and more. So in the Greek he could have just said more love. He could have said more and more, but he says still more and more. He's saying this is a growth in love he is praying for that is ultimate. And the thing about the self-giving love, when you look at this prayer, he doesn't actually say who this love is directed to. He's not saying, I pray that you have a deeper love for the poor, or for each other, or even for God. Because I think for Paul, in this instance, he's saying it doesn't matter. What I want is about you growing as a sacrificial lover, not about who you're loving. Should this love be for the church, for the hurting, for the God? Yes, right? This is his prayer in lockdown, that their love will abound. And this love is to abound, first of all, in knowledge. And I want to be clear, this word is not the Greek word for intellectual knowledge. That's the word oida. But this is the word for personal knowledge, gnosis, right? This is about knowing love personally and practically. It's learning from the experience of the ultimate lover. So Paul's not saying, I hope you go and read all these amazing books about love and then sit back with a big head. He's saying, I hope and pray that you encounter the living God. And as you do this, this drives you to experience love and practice love more and more. So this love is to abound in knowledge, but it's also to abound in depth of insight. And this is a phrase which is about morality. It's about understanding what is right and wrong in love. So what Paul is clear here is we actually need both knowledge and insight for this agape, self-sacrificial love of Christ to grow. Because if we don't know God, who is love in his essence, our love will be stunted. But if we don't discipline our moral life in these times as well, choosing what is right, our love will also be stunted. But if we choose to create space in our lives where we might know God and also seek to discipline our lives from that love, Paul says our love's going to flourish. And so you might be asking, well, what results from this, right? And that's what Paul prays in verse 10, that you may be able to discern what is best and may be pure and blameless until the day of Christ. What results from this abounding, this more and more love when we create this space is an ability to choose what's best. And isn't this actually what we want? To know the best way? You know, part of the reason people go on OEs, for example, is they go, I want to discover myself so I know myself better. Part of the reason we might want more money is to have the best life. But when there's all these decisions ahead of us, choosing between left and right, which way is right and wrong, it can be confusing. I know I get confused by this with decisions ahead of me, and I want what's best. But so often what can happen is I'm focusing on those outcomes and planning on these and ignoring the way to get there. Paul says this isn't just about us intellectually choosing the best way for life. It's about choosing to create space where we can encounter the love of God, where we can abound in this love. And from this place, our lives are transformed, and making these decisions, right? Being able to choose what's pure and best becomes natural to us. And we can become pure, this word meaning that our lives can be held up right up to the sun for inspection and they just gleam with goodness. This is not a purity that runs away from the world, it's a purity within the world. And this last verse, in verse 11, Paul says, praying that you will be filled with the fruit of righteousness that comes through Jesus Christ to the glory and praise of God. The fruit of righteousness, here's the thing, this word could also mean the harvest of righteousness. And Paul is stressing our job is not to grow the fruit. That's what Christ does. Our job in lockdown is to live in such a way that Christ can work in us, to allow him to work. But what I want to point out is, do you see in Paul's prayer how all of this is connected? He's connected love with knowledge, with insight, with decisions, with morals, with growth, all through Jesus. This is compelling. This is not about fragmentation going, here's your prayer life, here's love, here's about knowledge. Paul is saying all of these flow in together, but they center on Jesus Christ. And as we learn to love him, this is where all of those things begin to abound. Seeking a morality without Christ is a waste of time. Seeking to grow your character without Christ is a waste of time. Seeking to grow your knowledge of God without a love of Christ is a waste of time. So the key lesson I just want to drill from here today is, if you feel like your faith is maybe fragmented into pieces, and perhaps your life is fragmented in pieces, can I just, quoting John Lennox, can I encourage you in the simplest way, soak in the scriptures until you see the face of Jesus. Read the Bible, sit with the Bible, read the stories until you see the faith of Jesus. And grow your knowledge of his love. See, we're shaped by the stories we soak in. Most of us, we end up soaking in the story of the world without even recognizing it. But be shaped by the gospel. Read and study this, practice this, and take it seriously.